Welcome to the Paru Zings, Appraisers on Purpose podcast. This podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? And what do they do now for their teams, their clients, and the industry? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
All right, welcome back. Just so grateful to have received fascinating, insightful, and sometimes perplexing feedback. Wade, love your insight and connection between the season 1 guest and the season 2. Thank you so much. And for everybody else, definitely keep on sharing. Hit the like button and whatever podcast venue you come across this wonderful conversation today for. Don't be stingy. Be generous. Create some value for some others by sharing this on. It's been wonderful as others have continued to pop up. Like, I didn't even know this existed. This is amazing. I knew nothing about her, nothing about him. And I didn't know there were so many options for me. And I have no doubt that you'll get that same wonderful set of takeaways in your own zone today from our wonderful guest, Michele Golden. Michele, welcome. Thanks for being with us today here on Perusing the Power of Values.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. It's always fun to have engaging individuals that just have lots of great stories to tell. So first question hasn't changed. Were you born this way? Or how did you get into the valuation and real estate appraisal profession?
No, I was not born this way. In fact, my first memory of what I wanted to be when I grow up, I wanted to be a gardener. That's what I used to tell my mom and dad. So they weren't in the real estate business at all. Kind of fell into it being in one employment realm and met an appraiser in that path. So it was kind of very interesting that I found myself working at a local newspaper after college and was helping out with classified ads. And an appraiser walks in and places an ad for a trainee. And we started talking and met his wife that same day. And they're like, stop by our office and, maybe you should apply.
Amazing. So you're literally were you a journalist at the time, or what was your role?
I was doing print ads, things like that. When I coming out of college, I had a business degree and, wanted to do advertising. And that was kind of like my first foot in the door. So, but it was a small newspaper in Newton, North Carolina, taking classified ads. So that's, very small.
That sounds amazingly familiar to some experience I had as well, working in the advertising department for a local newspaper. And you actually got some employment out of it.
Yeah, I'm sure they weren't happy that somebody stole me away, with that particular role. But, in meeting them, they were a nice couple, Austin and Kathy Smith. They had a real estate company going out of the basement of their home. And when I saw their home was this gorgeous colonial style home, like, wow, these people are doing really well. I was a young 23 years old living in a little 2-bedroom apartment. So I'm thinking, man, they really know what they're doing. So yeah, just great people.
So you were enamored with that impressive home is what I think I hear.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. They had, like I said, they had like 2 acres, a pool. A pool was kind of in their backyard in the area. So it was very, very nice. I'm thinking these people know what they're doing.
Excellent. And did they just move out of their home and let you learn and run the home, or did you just get to have like the front corner, like home office?
Yeah, so they were in the basement of their home, and they kind of had it sectioned out, but, allow me to even drive their cars when I first started working for them. Wow. Back then, I thought it was a lot of money too. They offered me to be a trainee for $300 a week. And I thought,
oh my,
wow,
they offered to pay you?
I know.
Oh my, they paid you. Oh, what a beautiful concept.
Right? $300 a week. So I'm thinking, wow, but this is great. I'm making some really good money here. I felt they were treating me better than I had heard anybody else of being treated. So, and got to drive their cars, when I took comp photos for them, or, I ended up doing some errands as well, but, just good people.
I think it's always fascinating, and just a personal interest of mine is when a couple is able to work together. I don't find it very often, but every so often you do. It sounds like you got to be in that realm of a couple working together. How was it working for the couple, and the differences between, say, the husband and the wife?
Yes. So sometimes you found yourself playing referee, not going to lie. They got along for the most part, but, treated you like one of your children, which was great. They were a blended family, so they each had, children from other marriages. So I just kind of like fit kind of right in there, Christmas presents, things like that. But yeah, sometimes the dynamic there, you're like, okay, I'm going to step outside while you all have a moment. Occasionally they're like, maybe I'd settle an argument. I'm like, oh, don't put me in that position. But anyway, it could be entertaining, to be in that position at times.
That is something else. And of course, inquiring minds want to know who was better at guiding and training you in those formative years.
Oh, I could get myself in trouble because Austin's an MAI. They each had their own way of doing. They each had their own way of doing things. Kathy was more focused on the residential side and Austin commercial, but really got different and good guidance from each. Austin had a better business sense. Kathy, was more, kind of down to earth. And, we pet every animal we saw, cat, dog, and otherwise when we'd go out. So, but it was kind of in rural North Carolina where it was come what may. So you never knew what you were gonna see from one day to the next.
That's pretty phenomenal. And you mentioned husband happened to have a designation. Did the wife also have a designation?
She did not. That wasn't something she was like kind of really interested in. But I will say MAI designation for Austin. He got that when I started working. That was a great celebration for him. So it was really a good moment to be a part of that.
That's fantastic. And did that influence you in any way early on, or did it mean anything to you because you were just still so new and you were like one of the family and they were giving you Christmas gifts at the card?
Yeah, I had looked at the Appraisal Institute to pursue a designation. At that time, from an income standpoint and where I was, it was kind of hard to keep up with because there's an expense involved with getting your SRA, the extra classes, things like that. They were supportive. It was just one of those things where it's like it would stop and start. So it was kind of hard to kind of get to the end of a designation. So that's one thing that I never kind of finalized or finished.
Oh, it totally makes sense. I mean, most people, myself included, I had no idea what designations were or extra education that people could take on. I mean, I was in for a long period of time before I experienced it. Infrequently, the opportunity has come up in these conversations where people were involved early on with people with designations. Sometimes it had influence and other times it didn't. So it's always just fascinating to kind of hear that take on things.
Yeah, and it was something like our customers weren't really clamoring for an SRA designation. It absolutely meant a lot for Austin to get, with the MAI, but for the SRA designation, it's not like we were getting more work or less work because I had it. So at that time, it just I had to prioritize, right?
Absolutely, completely makes sense. And then you mentioned they had a blended family, so I'm sure it only became just more heart-centered when you joined. So how long? We know for a fact you didn't stay there forever. So did you all get divorced or what happened? How did that go?
Yeah, I spent 7 years with them, and then I felt like it was kind of time to go out on my own. And I try to do it. We try to do it very fairly. I was trying not to compete with them. That's the one thing that I think a lot of people talk about is, hey, I'm gonna raise up a trainee here, and then they're gonna compete with me in my business. It's like that. I always knew that going in, and we talked about that very openly. So I had kind of lived in a different section of town, a little south of them in a different county. So when we separated, it's like, look, we're just going to be fair to each other because it's a small town, Hickory, North Carolina, Catawba County, very small town. So you certainly don't want to start, running each other down, amongst your peers. No. So it was an amicable split. Then I did 3 years, with my own business in Lincoln County, try not to cross over, but, still felt like them as a colleague and a peer where I could call them and kind of bounce things off of. That's one of the best things about being in this industry is having those connections and to be able to bounce things off of people.
And then, one of the interesting things that, because we have a number of different people, I should say, stages of where they're at in their profession. One stage is, hey, they're kind of early on or it's new to them. So this is always a fascinating set of podcast topics because like, wow, look at the different steps along that person's yellow brick road. And then other people who are in the profession are like, wow, I had no idea there were so many other options available to me than just what I'm doing. And for others, it's like, wow, this is great. That kind of reminds me of my early years. So people at different walks of life. What was it like for you through, said 7 full years of getting to work with them in terms of developing your abilities and getting exposure to different property types and animals for that?
Yeah. It definitely helped set me up for success, right? I mean, Austin did a really good job to be very open about how the business is run, taxes, things like that, because it's not just I appraise a property. There's accounting that goes behind that, quarterly taxes, keeping up with your expenses, MLS, things like that. So there's a lot that goes into it. And, if you're a one-person shop and you don't, have support, then you're kind of doing it all. I did end up kind of enlisting my husband to help out with photos and things like that. At that time, he was a little bit better with the photos and such, and he had a little bit of extra time. So, kind of sucked him in, though he's not an appraiser, he's a school teacher. But, Austin kind of helped set me up, and it kind of got me to a point where I'm like, I can swim on my own, but I have a safety net of somebody to be able to call, red bat phone, whatever you want to say, if I, needed help.
What did you find was one of the more challenging experiences, being new to the profession? Was it research oriented? Was it site activity? Was it coping with animals?
Well, I was bit by a dog or two in my time, but that wasn't like the best thing. But some of the most challenging things, and back then you could actually go to the realtors and ask them for work. So it was those kind of like, hey, I'm establishing things kind of like on my own. To say, hey, I've kind of separated from them. I am on my own, and some people would start to give me work, but then there was some that were like, well, we are still using other people in your area, so it's just a matter of kind of cultivating that client list, and kind of getting that going again, and just again being conscious of not to step in Austin's toes and way, but again, like he was very good about it, but yeah, kind of getting established out there on your own to be able to kind of handle your own pipeline, your own business, and then getting the money in. Because at that time, you were collecting checks at the door, you were calling, it wasn't like there wasn't any automatic deposits. You're watching your post office box to see, is there mail in there today? And you're just, putting checks and try to keep your personal and, business separate. But yeah, that's when people were like handing you checks.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
come down.
I was just talking to a property manager the other day regarding I've owned an awful lot of buildings, and this one happened to be a condominium. They require yes, there's a move-in deposit. Like, oh, no problem, we'll take care of it. We'll follow at it. Like, yes, they need to bring a check to our office and we'll hold it for them. I'm like, I don't think the person moving in has checks. I'm not even sure I know what checks are. And I'm like, what happens then? They're like, I don't know. I'm like, haven't you dealt with this before? They're like, this is 2023.
Yeah.
This is 20. This is 1980 or 1990 kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think my kid has ever written a check. Does not have a checkbook. 23-year-old, and he's adulting well.
I'm glad to hear he's adulting well. Good job, Mom. Wow. So what did you get to take on the responsibility of training or managing others while you were with Austin and the family, or did it stay small the whole time you were there?
We had a few people kind of come and go in the residential space. A couple of people we tried to train. Either volume didn't work out for them or personality. One thing or another. We had a couple people kind of come through and try to train them up. It didn't necessarily work out. Sometimes this just isn't for you, depending on where you are in, your career and things like that. So never got anybody to the finish line for trainees in that space, when I was there.
And then you mentioned that the time came where you decided amicably to give it a go on your own. How was it? Like, once you got out, were you like a young adult who's like, I'm so free to be out of the nest? Or you're like, I kind of like the nest. I think I might want to go back.
Yeah, at times it was, kind of conflicting, because it was like, well, I used to have a steady pipeline that he gave me, and now I'm kind of out on my own, kind of hustling. But, needed that break too. At that point, I was also a new mom, and needed a little bit more flexibility and control over my time and things like that. So that's the beauty of kind of being in this business and in this position is, you can set your schedule and kind of make it so that you can, be at your kids' stuff, help out at library day. The bad thing was for me is like when they were napping or when they went to bed at night from like 8 at night to 12 midnight, like you're cranking out reports then. So, I mean, it is kind of a give and take, but it really does help with work-life balance. So, for as much as it was time for me to kind of leave their little nest and everything, it was time for me to get out on my own. But, I had other things in my life that I needed to have, better control over, and, raising my kid and not sending him to daycare was important to us. we had Mother's Morning Out, things like that. But, he occasionally would come along and do a few inspections with me.
I totally love that and respect that. And my mother-in-law, she's 87, has Alzheimer's. I think she should be an appraiser by now. She's gone to so many appointments with me. She never remembers which one we're at or why we're going somewhere.
Right.
But that's not the point. But it's just, it's part, you just make it part of the normal operating procedure. Not having, like I said, getting to raise your kid and not have sent them to daycare. That is fantastic. And did you find that you enjoyed operating on your own, or having, in this case, all your own responsibilities? Or you're like, hey, maybe it'd be better if I, associate with someone or someone bigger?
Yeah. So it got to the point to where, watching the markets change, and all appraisers kind of experience this. We have the feast or famine in this world. So like when you're getting inspections, refinances, purchases are going really well, you're out there, you're killing it, right? But then all of a sudden the market corrections come and you're like, hey, work's just dried up. So for me, after 3 years of having my own company, it was like, well, I think I need to get something more stable. I need, I'm getting a little bit older. I needed to get somebody to contribute to a 401k for me. I needed, better benefits because, you're kind of supplying all your own benefits and they're quite pricey. So, that's when I decided to, with some of the companies I was talking to out of state, like a Countrywide and Land Safe, maybe an offer to move to Dallas that I just couldn't refuse. And I could just kind of see myself kind of getting more stability, getting better benefits for my family. And, the school system was way better in Plano and Frisco, Texas than it was where we were in North Carolina. So it was a good move for the family overall. But yeah, hustling it and trying to make it on your own in a business like that can be hard.
Oh, I think many people can relate to that statement about the hustling and the hardness that come from being out there, especially on your own. So the difference between just being the one house as the tornado comes through, or hopefully the tornado comes through a particular area and you're like, it doesn't hit all the houses, it just hits a couple of them and just don't hit mine.
Right. Well, but that was at the point where you're seeing a lot of these subprime, mortgage and things being made, and there's more and more. And, as you watch as an appraiser, as everything kind of unfolded, you're like, man, these people are like really, having a really high loan to value ratio here, and they're getting all these arms, and they're, because I knew a little bit about qualifying, try to educate myself and, what it takes to buy a house as well. I'm like, wow, these people are, when I'm looking at their terms, I'm like, man, this is really kind of risky. And you could just kind of smell it building and coming. So this was around, 2003 when I joined Countrywide and Land Safe. But I was like, I knew there had to be another market correction coming because like we talked before, it just happens. So I wanted to get someplace to be safe. And look what I chose.
As someone jokingly said in a recent podcast, I chose stability only to get to ride the wave of the economics and the seasonality. Like I get more waves here than I ever thought were possible. I'm like, congratulations.
Yeah, it's awesome. We're all surfers.
Oh goodness. What was the experience for you moving from working in this case, a small family business, and then being on your own and now joining a large organization from a standpoint both of role and responsibility, but also in terms of personal growth?
Yeah, definitely a lot of personal growth. It had been a long time since I've been in any type of like office environment, and I was used to kind of being on my own. Appraisers out in the field were wearing like khaki sneakers, maybe a poloed shirt, possibly, or t-shirt shorts.
Dressed up, it sounds like khakis and a polo shirt. That's pretty impressive compared to something.
If I'm going from a house to a bank, because most of the time, like you're like hand delivering paper to the bank. So I'm delivering like appraisals to them, and I didn't want to look like, I didn't want to look like I just came out of the yard working. So like some days you just kind of had to pick up your game a little bit, but it was definitely different because I'm like, oh, I have to wear, dress pants and shoes and, nice shoes and being a little more structured. So it took some getting used to the structure, but, I kind of came in there from North Carolina as an expert, in that field in rural manufactured homes, things like that, where they didn't have anybody. So I filled a void for them and then, really got to learn how to review nationwide. So I kind of felt like I was expanding my skill set, which I think you constantly have to do.
Could you touch a little bit on your process or experience or maybe, so if it was a program that you went through to go from having a local market experience to not only working in a new market, but then, as you said, getting exposure nationally? Because that's something that blows most people's minds. They're like, well, I know my activity or my MLS. How am I supposed to do the work in another market? Which is something that holds many people back.
Yeah, and it definitely was intimidating for me at first. You have to stick with, use PAP and, make sure the standards are being applied. But, when I was there, I met some people that I consider friends and mentors that, helped for me to change my mindset and help me kind of look at things like, well, this is how this market reacts and this is how this is. And, always knew that, California was way different than everything else and way more expensive. So just had a lot of people take the time and pour into me because, yes, I'm bringing my local knowledge and I'm looking at those reports, but then they're like, hey, we need help in these other areas too. So, a lot of the things I was first looking at maybe more rural based, and because I had that creativity for rural, right? Not everything is cookie cutter. Not every property is going to be the same. Especially in the manufactured home realm, you have acreage, what have you. So, with the training and the job that I had, in North Carolina, which was suburban and rural, you get creative with putting together assignment and kind of picking things. So that kind of helped me in looking at maybe like in Arkansas, maybe I'm looking in East Texas, some of the other areas up and down the East Coast. So, I kind of had a good base for rural where I can kind of put some things together, but then I had to learn about some other micro markets. So, I hate to use an appraiser term, but I had to become geographically competent in a, pretty quickly.
Oh my gosh. No appraiser term here.
Sorry. Oh my gosh. Time out for me. Time out. But, I did have to learn how to put on a national lens. And thank goodness for people at Landsafe that helped me with that.
And how, given what you experienced, and obviously had significantly more experience since then, how could others even start to put on a proverbial cap that says, I don't have to be just constrained to one market? Any thoughtful tips you could offer?
Yeah, so I'm just naturally curious about real estate in general. I've lived in a bunch of different places too. I've lived in Pennsylvania, New York, North Carolina, Texas, Florida. So, even when you're just kind of traveling, picking up the local magazines there and kind of reading them, keeping up with areas and such. I watch a lot of HGTV. So, I mean, it's just little subtle things. It's like if there's an area that you're kind of curious about, read about it, talk to a local realtor. Just, like I said, when we go places, I pick up the local magazines and I sit there and I read them. What's for sale? What's the, price per square foot that they're selling for? What's the flavor of the area? So, as I travel across the United States, I do that as well. So I don't know if it's a sickness or just a curiosity, but you have to have almost like a natural curiosity to want to learn more.
That definitely makes sense. It's hard to grow without a sense of curiosity. That is definitely it. And so you mentioned getting to work for, in this case, a national player in the industry. How did your roles change while you were in that environment?
Yeah, so I spent a few years there at Landsafe and ended up kind of getting like a team lead role, and that was just based off of like I said, that natural curiosity, wanting to learn. Because when I uprooted my family from North Carolina to Texas, my thing was like, I'm not just gonna go there and just kind of sit there and just do a job. I'm gonna learn. I'm gonna grow. I want to be a leader in this industry. I want to manage people. Just kind of like progressively, kind of working forward. So it was one of those things where, it didn't have a very tall career path there. You could get to an RCA, like a regional chief appraiser type kind of a thing there. So it was really ended up being more like a stepping stone for me to be like, okay, I'm kind of a team lead. I'm looking at like maybe wholesale reports, things like that. So ended up using it as a stepping stone, to kind of help me towards finding a leader role. Because unfortunately, unlike what my father grew up, in his career working for IBM, the same company the entire time, it seems these days to where if you want to get to that next level, you work really hard to try and get that within the company that you're in, but you ultimately end up finding that maybe in a competitor. And, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have loyalty, to anybody that you work for, but, if your career is progressing and you're not seeing that within the company that you're serving, by all means, look to your left and to your right and to see if that'll fulfill what you want to do in your career.
Oh, that makes a ton of sense. And, you touched on one interesting thing, which again, many people in the profession have never had an opportunity to actually be an employed reviewer. You mentioned, for instance, like an RCA, maybe some of the other roles. How were you one who naturally acclimated towards the curiosity side of, okay, well, I don't get to go out and see the properties, but I kind of get to see them by looking at other people's reports? Or did you kind of pine for, I'd love to be back in the field and not being bit by a dog?
Yeah, it was just one of those things where, I think as an appraiser, we all get those phone calls from those reviewers and those underwriters, and you listen to what they have to say, and some of them seem like, wow, they're really smart, they're really kind of on this, and then you talk to some, you're like, yeah, they really don't know my market. Let me explain to you what my market is. But in kind of talking to them, I'm like, I kind of like, I would even ask them, tell me a little bit more about your position and what you do, so I understood where they were coming from. Some were appraisers and some weren't, but the one that were appraisers, they were telling me, benefits, things like that, things that were kind of like appealing for me, with a growing family and such. So, it came through just conversations from them calling me on my reports. And I'm like, wow, this is something I can actually do. I like what the stability and the benefits packages and stuff that they have. So that's what kind of sparked my curiosity. And I'm like, well, I could still keep doing my job, as an appraiser, and be kind of beneficial to somebody who maybe not have the knowledge that I was coming away with from North Carolina.
Oh, that makes a ton of sense. And given that you've touched on that natural curiosity that you had and that commitment that you had by relocating from the East Coast down to the Republic of Texas, how did that factor into your sense of timing for when to pursue your next opportunity?
Yeah, so it was one of those things where I'm one of these people that constantly has to be kind of like learning and growing, right? I have that desire, and I'm always like, it's almost like a carrot out there for me to kind of keep driving and getting to, professionally, like the next level, like where I want to go. I try to set ideal time frames for myself, like, okay, really, you shouldn't expect to get into any kind of director level until like 5 years. With each time the market's kind of reset, I've almost had to reset my career goals. So in 2008, when I was like, all right, I'm managing a group of people here at W&C Mortgage, but, I'd like to get to even like larger, like more, global, like a director. So like, what skills do I need to take on? So, it's just one of those things where, I was constantly with reviewing. It was like, okay, I always wanted to get, okay, I want to manage people that review. And then I want to, manage maybe, more of a, global, place in like whatever company I was at. So those opportunities just weren't coming with Countrywide. There were so many people to compete with. So look for my next opportunity then.
And given that you had an opportunity, one, to be involved in a large organization, but two, to be open-minded towards what your next possibility might be, what did you do to develop your abilities, your skills, your professional talent? Because in my experience, I haven't necessarily found a lot of that exists inside the industry, and definitely, sadly, in this kind of, we were joking beforehand about the CE cycle, where I shall withhold my opinions at the moment, is as sharply worded as they are, to say that they're disappointing most of the time. How did you develop your professional capacity for advancement?
Yeah, so I actually had to look for almost like valuation partners. And when I say valuation partners, it's, our reports go downstream, right? They go to underwriters, they go to, processors, things like that. So, in that, I started to develop relationships with whichever company I was with, of like, who's going to be using my reports, and in talking to them, I want to make sure I'm delivering like a good product. So I'm looking at, kind of how they're developing. What are they doing? Especially when I was at Capital One, they were doing a lot of lean management to kind of help with process improvement. So to be able to kind of speak to them and kind of being a leader coming out of valuations, I had to learn how to speak lean management, process improvement, things like that. So whatever that they were doing, it was like I was leaning in and could take those opportunities as well. So thank goodness for non-appraisers in my life that were tied to the valuation, that gave me and helped me to have more of a risk mindset, and almost challenging me to, if you want to help our relationship out with the line of business, take something like design thinking, take strategic thinking.
Okay.
So, learn, like I said before, about process management, problem solving. We're so quick to look at a problem, within the appraisal industry or any industry and jump to a solution. Did you really walk through the steps of how do you solve? So I just had a natural curiosity for some of the leaders that I was seeing within the line of business that I supported. And I'm like, I like that how you carry yourself, how you run your department, almost an admiration, and asking them, what did you do to get there? And there was a few that poured a whole lot into me and were very helpful in, kind of setting me in the right direction of stop thinking like an appraiser and start thinking strategically, and you're actually going to help the valuation department grow and get a better relationship with the line of business. So it kind of came from very different places, not expecting it to come out of the appraisal space.
I think that's so much value in such a few short sentences that hopefully really enlighten some of our peers. I know many times, maybe you as well, have been in conversation with individuals who might have a sense of not being exposed to opportunities or not knowing what kind of opportunities are out there or how to position themselves for it. And that's a really thoughtful response, as well as demonstrating how you use your curiosity and your willingness to adapt and employ what's going on in the environment around you so that you can contribute and ultimately move from just being a team member to a team leader.
Yeah, sometimes you have to take the assignments maybe nobody else wants. As in 2008, when some of the businesses were kind of winding down, people were getting laid off, et cetera, but there were large loan pools and things that needed to be sold, for these companies, their non-performing loans and things like that. So there was at times they were looking for people to volunteer to kind of look at 2 BPOs, provide a valuation for like these loan pool sets, so that that they could get an idea of what the valuation should be for these properties. So a lot of people are like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm like, put me in, coach. I'll do it. You just have to kind of maybe do the things that you don't want to, but it builds your skill set and it kind of helps you. So I learned so much about the secondary market. In that time period after 2008, it was valuable to me because that's kind of what then helped me, get into like Goldman Sachs and really kind of like another piece in the puzzle for being chief appraiser. It's like, it's not just mortgage and refinance. It's secondary markets. It's all the things that you could possibly step into. So, you have to, like I said, volunteer maybe for things that people don't want to do, but you'll add so much more to yourself and you'll grow. It's painful. It wasn't fun, but I learned, right?
Well, that is it's a wonderful acknowledgement of just, and for many in the industry, they maybe have experienced more like your father, where there's one either employment or one kind of type of employment, and that's it just from beginning to end. And as they would say in the South, bless their heart. But that doesn't always go that way.
Right.
Many people move around in different places. We heard from a previous guest who, like, one day he was out there appraising, next day he's out there helping get people on the internet. Woo, you can have a landing page too. And they didn't call them landing pages back then. They called them internet. It was just so exciting. And that ability to move around to so many different participants within the industry, as you've touched on, as you mentioned, going from LandSafe, which ultimately became Bank of America, and then being a WMC, and then moving over to come through chief appraiser, or get involved from a big capital company like Capital One, and then going on to Goldman Sachs. I mean, there's very few people that have an appraisal background that end up at Goldman Sachs. I mean, were you just the unicorn at Goldman Sachs, or what was that like?
There's actually a few people that had kind of come through there in that space. But, when I joined there, it was specifically around non-performing loan pools. And they were plentiful at the time. After about 18 months, that started to kind of dry up to where we're doing reperforming, which is great, right? I mean, you obviously want to see things turn around. But, there was a handful of us that had the appraisal background and were appraisers and such. So definitely got to meet them, but, got to learn and talk to some people on like the New York trading desk. So just learned something new there. I'm going downtown Dallas in a very high office building. Never been there. I felt like I had a big girl job as I was joining, and just like a completely new experience. Like, I don't know. It was a bit overwhelming at times, but there were definitely other appraisers there. But I got to talk to people that I would never have talked to before and interacted with if I would have been like in a banking environment.
And for those inquiring minds, was the Goldman Sachs office in Dallas as intense as it is in Midtown and there in New York, or was it a little more laid back, like the cowboy boot, as like sharps?
I felt like we were like an outpost at times, kind of a little bit of out of sight, out of mind. But as the trade ramped up, it got more intense of like later hours, things like that. But trying to get those last little bit of reports in for due diligence. But definitely when that phone rang and it was them, you answered it. Regardless, they had your cell phones as well. So. I think it was a little bit more laid back than there in Midtown, but we still would feel the pressure, especially when it came to tying out a trade and getting it done. But quite an experience.
That quite is, and you've used some industry terminology that's very common in the NPL space. You mentioned trades and what have you. Most people have no idea what you're speaking to.
Oh,
but could you take just a minute and kind of explain that concept of the trades and the NPL and probably the valuation work that you were doing to help provide some certainty around their marking to the transaction?
Yeah, these were typically large organizations, won't drop any names, that had non-performing loans that were trying to sell them in in a group. There'd be thousands of these loans, ranging from $20,000 up to some like 500, 600, 700. We had some in the millions. So you have to kind of look at these and kind of bucket them into valuations of, maybe you have some that are, 25,000 and below or 50,000 and below. But, at that time there was a threshold for $250,000 and above where you would have to order a little bit more due diligence in that you'd have to order more like an evaluation. The stuff that kind of fell in between and under there, you can order BPOs. So you have your BPO and your evaluation, and the company that is selling these to you, they have their BPO and their valuation, their broker price opinion. So you're trying to look at it and see what's the actual value. You're getting condition reports to look at to see what the condition of the property is. There were some that we would kick out of the pool, quite frankly, because there's a tarp on the roof that a hurricane came through and kind of partially demolished the home. So trying to get an idea of which ones made good quality purchases and which ones is like, hey, we're not taking this, and you're kicking it out of the pool. So we would do that on that's kind of intake buying a pool, but then we would sell some out as well. But the most due diligence we did on the ones where we were actually like purchasing that, and then we would do various things. We had other departments that would do various things like loss mit and try to get these people to get the loans to perform again, and try to reach out to them, maybe restructure things like that. So there was a kind of a lot of moving parts that went to these trades, and you'd have about a 6-week time period to get them through, and you don't want to be late in your deadline because, quite frankly, they could go somewhere else and get somebody else to buy them. So it could get intense. Like your first few days, you're ordering product, you're kind of waiting. Then when product, I mean valuations. And as the valuations started coming in, you start doing your due diligence, and then you're waiting for the last few to tie out, and then kind of sending everything and finally everything for New York. But it could get intense there towards the end if you were missing a couple of evaluations, trying to make some decisions on what to do.
I think that's such a helpful perspective, and I appreciate you taking a moment and just kind of sharing that in a little more detail than most people ever get exposed to, because there's that sense of, well, I'm working as hard as I can, or I'm already busy. The answer is yes, and there are other parties involved, many times significantly larger in influence and in impact, and the time is the time. That's just kind of how it goes, and that's not always understood. I found when I was just in the field operating on my own. I was like, maybe you gained that same perspective.
Yeah, that's the one thing, and especially when you talk about field appraisers, such like that, those times and the deadlines are very critical, because and I try to talk to people that work for me as well, either reviewers or appraisers, that, you have somebody's, with these timelines that they're giving you, you have somebody's kind of like life, I don't want to say in your hands, but like you're in control of like a very important part of their life, and that's their financial stability typically. They're moving their family or they're refinancing to help consolidate debt, things like that. And for the appraisals and the dates and everything to get extended, that kind of creates like a really bad time for them and adds more stress. So it's like with everything that you touch and that you do, there's a story behind it. Somebody's moving into their first house, somebody's downsizing, somebody's, maybe moving up for their family. They've already placed their furniture in this home. You've got realtors involved. So, timing's important. Timing's very important, and to know like what's at stake on the other end of that. So you can't be numb to the people that are involved.
I mean, how is it that you're not the next CEO of Golden? I mean, you actually left? I didn't know people were allowed to leave.
Yeah, like I said, it was one of those things where the non-performing loan pools had kind of dried up. They're doing more re-performing. They wanted to shift me into like a vendor management role, which, I mean, I was a great people person, did well with process, and they just thought this would be a good place for you. They did like to retain talent, and I was like, well, it didn't align with what I wanted to do. So went to Fannie Mae next into the Loan Quality Center, was actually hired there as like a senior manager, a manager into their group there, into the Loan Quality Center. So, but that was another great opportunity for me to get to learn, look under the hood there of a GSE, something I didn't have the experience for, and to see, what it takes to get a loan repurchased. So that's how I kind of ended up there. It's like, well, the time at Goldman had kind of come to an end.
No, I really appreciate that. And what I hear you saying is that because you had a sense of who you are and what you're capable of doing and what you wanted to accomplish, for you, that gave you clarity on your time there as well as what your next opportunity would be.
Yeah, I mean, I could have done it. Would have been fulfilling for me? Probably not. It kind of would have taken me off track, right, of where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. Prior to coming to Goldman, I was at Capital One, and I had spent, a good 7 years there, and was on a great career trajectory before they decided to get out of the business. I think that's one of the things that, in this appraisal field, there's a lot of, like we've talked about, roller coaster ebb and flow, to where it's growing really well. You're on a great path, but then I had to reset, right? Because, I was a senior manager at Capital One, taking a lot of steps in my career to become a director, like taking some of those, like I said, those lean management classes, leadership classes, unconscious bias classes. And then, okay, now I have to reset. So, which led me to Goldman. And now I'm like, okay, almost like going to Fannie Mae kind of put me back on track to get back into where I thought I wanted to go next.
I love that. So what was it? I mean, at this point, at that point in your career, you had started out in a family business. You'd been a solopreneur. You'd gone to work for a national lender. You have moved over to a large financier. Now you've been via Dallas associated on Wall Street. And now you're back in kind of the heart of residential lending at Fannie Mae. How was that experience compared to everything else?
Yeah, definitely different. That was definitely a very large learning experience for me, because whatever lending practices I had been in before, I got to see what happens when they ask to repurchase, right? What it takes to make for a good loan by GSE standards. You think you know what that is until you get in there, and then you start reviewing and kind of really digging into, and it's like, wow, I can see where maybe some of the things that I have done past, maybe that wasn't a great lending decision that we made, because I'm watching lenders and stuff being asked to repurchase. Not that it was a large percentage at that point when I was there, they were asking to repurchase, but just the process that they go through and looking at different things, in order to know like what makes a good appraisal even, so it was huge learning experience for me.
Amazing. And at this point in your career, was it both still learning as it relates to kind of the appraisal side of the business, as much as it is learning about all the other pieces, such as the interaction of the GSEs and how all these pieces fit together, and appraisal is just a piece of it? Like, where would you say the majority of your learning was, at least early on in your time? when you got to Fannie Mae?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of learning about like, behind the scenes of like the collateral underwriter, machine that they have, their model that they have, learning, how they kind of like build their files and things like that for, when doing repurchase. So there's a lot of like learning, like, not even, I don't think every appraiser, they definitely don't have access to something like this. So I kind of felt, wow, look at the opportunity I have to really understand and really kind of look under the hood and understand this industry. So a lot of the growth and learning was, like the appraisal side of this. But then, in turn, when I was there, they were going through like a process improvement change. So I learned, picked up how to use Power BI while I was there. And, that was the first time I saw something like that. I had been, trained in Capital One and like Tableau and some other things, but somebody else was kind of building that for us. So, but, then got kind of introduced to some tools that I hadn't seen before, like Power BI. And I'm like, oh, I can actually control my own metrics and data. I'm able to kind of build my own spreadsheets and dashboards and not sit there and wait on tech support and things like that. So like, you want to talk about increasing my tech knowledge by leaps and bounds of how to self-serve. That was an incredible piece for me. So, working with their process management team and, really learning how to do that and self-serve was a phenomenal experience. And, worked with a great team lead there, Mike Scarpa, who, between the two of us, we were kind of taking the things that we were learning, with the group that we were running and kind of like going through Fannie Mae and some of the other departments and saying, hey, look what we learned by using Power BI and, kind of demoing that out. So got a lot of exposure then to just presentations, I don't want to say on the fly, but almost like, hey, let's pull up to a screen here that's kind of in the middle of the floor and just do a preemptive, let's try to do some process change, just a lot of things that, really kind of help stretch my skills.
I think that's amazing. And you touched on things like Tableau and Power BI. And I know a number of our very informed peers know all about that, but a lot of people have no idea what you're talking about. What is, at least, let's just take the easy, not the easy one, but the bigger one, Power BI. How if you had to explain that to a child, to keep it nice and simple, that's the point. How would you have trained Power BI?
Yeah, so it's a way for you to take information on production, things that you're doing on a daily basis, and kind of put those into charts and measurements. So that you can look at, hey, how many appraisals did I complete yesterday compared to how many appraisals did I complete the day before? And what's, maybe like what's a trend compared to other people? So it's a good place to, take some numbers and some maybe production numbers of the things that you're doing, itemize them and put them like on a spreadsheet, but then be able to take those and push them into graphs and do comparison to, how is this appraiser performing to another appraiser? What's the quality of their work compared to another appraiser's quality of work? So you can kind of start comparing and, kind of looking at, your group to see, well, how are they really performing? That's a big thing that, you want to be very transparent with, is like, how productive am I? Am I doing a good job? You have to be able to measure things like that.
No, I think that, thank you for explaining that. Most people probably have never been exposed to Power BI. They're like, oh, well, I've used Excel. And it's like, yeah, Excel is a wonderful tool for rows and columns. And as you've touched on, Power BI literally takes vast, unrelated sets of data and can clean them up and create relationships or identify relationships and interoperability that just doesn't exist otherwise to many humans' eyes. Some really smart people figure that stuff out. Most of them, they got to use a tool, and that's phenomenal. You get an opportunity to be exposed to that by going to an organization like Fannie Mae, and then how that opens up your ability to really start to produce new insights and even results that previously didn't exist.
Right. So, it's very transparent because you're sharing this out with your team, you're sharing it out with management. We ended up kind of sharing it out just broadly across the loan quality center. And, it makes you accountable. And just with that accountability and kind of sharing across the board with people, we would have batches of work. And when I first got there, it was taking them like 22 days to finish a batch. And you could see maybe who was dropping off and who was doing a better job. now that it's accountability and everybody's seeing it, we got the batch down to like 18 days. When I say batch, it's like 1,000 different appraisals to review, like in a month's time period. And there's some high producers, there's some low producers. Some people producing more than others. There's some people that are better in quality. And I tell you what it ended up doing is some of the appraisers who were performing really well were looking at their peers and they're very tight, almost like a family there, looking at their friends going, I can help you get your production up. So, you kind of set the numbers out there and you kind of let them talk amongst themselves, and they ended up helping each other. It was a beautiful thing. Because when's the last time you heard an appraiser out in the field go, hey, I'm going to collaborate with my peer down the street to see, how I'm doing and if I'm doing a good job or not? Appraisers just don't do that. So with this collaborative environment that they were fostering, this made a great opportunity for people to actually like learn from each other, help from each other. And you don't need a leader can just kind of sit back. You set the environment for that. And then you sit back and kind of like watch it happen. You just plant the seeds and let others help you water it. I mean, you can't sit there and micromanage it, right? That's the wrong way to go about it. But if you let them kind of help each other out and just kind of catch them if they fall or if they got a question, it really is a beautiful thing to watch.
I think that is so nicely said. I think the only thing that would be better is if somehow we had some type of colorful video that displayed like the power of the relationships you're talking about, because audibly, it is fascinating. It is amazing. And it is one of those, it's akin to when maybe there's a relative you haven't seen in a while and it's been 4 or 5 years and suddenly they go from maybe being an adolescent to a young adult. You're like, whoa, what happened? You're like, well, a little bit of time, a lot of insight, and like things change. And that I'm hearing that same type of opening up in terms of opportunities and experiences that did not exist prior to the utilization of the technology, and they became available because of it.
Yeah, I mean, collaboration is a really important part of our business, especially when you kind of move into an environment of, if you're going to be a staff appraiser on an AMC, if you're going to be in a bank, things like that. That's the one thing that, you have to learn: collaboration, risk management, problem solving. These are things you just need in the more corporate environment than you do out there in the field. Some people, that's their spirit animal, and some of it's not. So, don't close yourself off to something like that, but, maybe listen, learn. There's some great things you can find on YouTube. Like Simon Sinek is a great person to listen to for, trying to change your mindset and trying to kind of help. He's kind of out there, talking more in the business world, but you can take a lot of those principles that you get from some of these people on TED Talks, and they would apply here. So you just have to have a curiosity. You just have to have that growth mindset of like, I'm just not going to sit here and just do appraisals. I have a curiosity. I want to do more.
Oh, absolutely fascinating. And I mean, given this dynamic time in your career is what it sounds like to me, I think you didn't stay there. So what lured you away from such an expansive time for yourself as an individual and for you professionally?
Right. So, at that time, Wells Fargo was doing a reorganization and expanding, and Rick Langdon, who's like the chief appraiser of all chief appraisers, was there. And I always admired him, whenever I heard him speak and things like that. And within his group, they were looking for like a residential consultant, and it was one of those roles where you need all the skill sets that I just took on to be able to kind of look, at the size of the department that it was, to need to be able to kind of come in with that broad set and say, like, what's best practice, what should we be doing? Because this is a large group, so it was the chance to get to work with him, and he just retired here recently, not long after I left there, but was an opportunity.
He said it was all over. He said if Michelle's not staying, I'm not staying. I mean, it was like, I'm out. Where you go, Rick?
Yeah, no, he's oh man, he had so many years there, but and many admirers, but yeah, got a chance to really kind of get some insight off of him, in his final times there at Wells, but and a lot of other people as well. So they just kind of like drew me there. They needed the skill set that I had. So
it's fantastic. And so at this point, what type of activities do you oversee or are you responsible for when you step into a role, because you've had such a, in this case, wide and deep exposure across, we'll call it the industry, not just talking, an appraisal report, but the whole sphere that involves valuation and assets.
Yeah, I'll steal a Forrest Gump line. Like life, like a box of chocolates. You just don't know what you're going to get from day in to day out. It was a very fluid role, which some part of that was a little bit uncomfortable. Because it was just like, hey, just kind of like move your way around, and not a whole lot of structure to what I did, but just almost like, hey, go find things. Oh, okay, I was reporting to Dave Knoll at the time. Kind of go find things. Let me kind of like really get to know the head of operations here, and spend time with Rick, things like that. So it was very fluid in that, almost like find a need, fill a need type kind of a thing. So ended up kind of pressing into different things. Like at that time, this was like a lot of the height of 2021, where we were seeing purchases and markets are rapidly increasing. So, one of the first things I took on was, looking at how often we were missing the sales prices from, our panel or our staff appraisers, and why that was. Some of it just made sense, right, during that time, but, poured a lot of time in there to make sure that we were doing the right thing when it came to looking over these appraisals, completing them, if you're going to miss a purchase price. So that was a big part of one of the things I kind of dove into, looking at how the AMCs are performing, how we're performing as staff. So just, a bunch of different things presenting to Dave on, Dave Knoll, who was the head of valuation at that time, of, what I'm seeing overall in the department, and where I was going to head next.
How did that continue to shape your whole view of the profession? Because you're seeing things at all the way down to a micro level, because you're like, hey, we're missing, the transaction, and at the same time you're seeing it on a macro level. It's such a perspective that few people get to develop.
Yeah, so this is where my biggest learning curve was for me, is the scale. Wells Fargo is so large, such a large organization, and even at Capital One, the valuation and lending group wasn't that large. Card and auto for Capital One always kind of seemed to rule, and this was just kind of an add-on. So this was definitely a time for me to try to scale my thinking. And that was probably the thing I struggled with the most, because, things that were successful maybe in process improvements that may have worked in smaller increments at other places, now it's like, yeah, I'm thinking too small here. So I, did a lot of time just, talking to people, inside of the company, talking a lot to Rick and like, hey, here's an idea I have. It's like, is this going to fly here in this large a setting? Am I scaling my thinking? So that was the biggest challenge for me, is to try and think from this perspective, because the department was like 1,000 people, and that doesn't include the panel and such that they had out there in the field. So it was definitely a mindset change that I had to kind of go through.
Definitely. Wow. I can appreciate that. And then how is it that you didn't get to ascend to fulfill the incomparable shoes of Rick?
Well, coming into a place like that, this was a company that had a lot of long-standing hires. They had people that have been there 20, 30 some odd years, and worked alongside of Rick. So, for me, this was, I was still considered to be new compared to everybody else. Even 5 years, if I would have been 5 years in, it would still have been considered to be new. But, and they kind of had a philosophy change, in how they were going to be doing things. The market's kind of winding down, and, they kind of shift their lending and how they were going to do things. So, they got a great new chief appraiser there now. He's not new. He was in their in their compliance and assurance program. Blaine Kazarian, great person, great pick for them. Saw him at Val Expo, so I think they did a great hire for that. But yeah, I was in a long waiting line on that one.
And again, coming back to the appreciation for understanding like who you are, what you're naturally good at, and the type of role that you want to have. How did that lead you to your next opportunity? So
this was about, I think they posted a role like September, October of last year for Accurate Group. And, I don't want to call it my end goal because I got a lot of years to work. I was
so young. I mean, I know you're only like 29. I mean, you
look at you.
Short period of time. Thanks. Nobody else can see us, but you understand what we're saying.
Right. Yeah, I've got another 15 years to work, but my ultimate goal was to get to a chief appraiser role. But in doing so, I felt like the path that I took, I had to take on all these different skills because it is very much here. Things are different every day. And things that I either have to kind of focus on and things like that, especially process improvements, procedures, things like that. So saw this open up, knew that Wells Fargo was, kind of changing their philosophy, and that there were some restructuring by them and right sizing, and that it made sense. So felt like I was kind of getting swept up in that. So this just happened to work out perfectly. So I think they had several applications. I actually was a user of the Accurate Group and their evaluations when I was at Goldman. So knew Paul Doman here, knew Rich Heltzel, who was the salesperson. So I was buying product from them. So I knew that they had a good product because that's how we would, tie out our loan pools. So, just made a few phone calls to them, to Rich, and, ended up being a candidate for interview, and then ultimately offer the position. So, but just feel like, and especially in the past few months, every skill I have taken on over the past 30 years has kind of brought me to this place and has saved me more times than not.
That's a phenomenal experience. And for those that don't know and maybe haven't worked at a large organization or a client, if you will, of data services from Accurate Group, like, who is Accurate Group and what do they do? Because you're at again, diverse experience that prepares you for a diverse organization.
Right, and they're known as an appraisal management company, but they also have title. We have a groundworks platform that does all our inspecting, and we've been kind of doing the appraisal monetization products for a very long time. I've been told it's going back to 1998 when the ValueNet product actually started, and it's a proprietary product that it's a desktop appraisal that they have an inspection that kind of comes alongside that. So kind of been doing the piecemeal for that, the hybrid, the bifurcated process for several years, but the groundworks is what supplies the inspection. So on any given day, I could be looking at how things are running in groundworks to ValueNet to full appraisals, just kind of running the gamut, relationship with the customers, things like that. So definitely honing in on all the skill sets. And when, the valuations that we do, it is some mortgage refinance, but home equity, secondary markets, REOs, as is and as repaired value. So just really kind of just pulling all that experience along with me to be able to pivot and know exactly kind of what's going on, because the word of the day seems to be flexible for me.
I definitely hear that. I would love to say that that's always the word that comes to mind when I meet some other peers in the valuation profession, but it doesn't. But Michele, with you, that is very much the case. And a storied professional career, and it's barely half over. Still at such a young age, and still having such an impact. What most at this point, given all that Accurate Group does and all the experience you have that you bring to Accurate Group, what do you what's most enjoyable and exciting about this role? Because very few people in our profession will ever get to your accomplishments of being a chief appraiser. But tell us a little bit about that.
I'm a people person, so I like interacting with the different groups that we have here, trying to to support the staff appraiser group that we have here, and kind of pouring knowledge into them. We have a very young person. Her name is Amanda, who's kind of taking on like the staff appraiser role, and she's not an appraiser. So just it's almost fun to kind of take somebody like that and like teach them, and kind of help them, support them, be able to talk to appraisers, things like that. So just talking to to some of the people that maybe like new in the industry. That's one thing I do like as well. Kind of gets me excited. Very much involved in the appraisal diversity initiative. So in their ability to and the desire to bring new people into the industry. So that for me, meeting them, meeting new people, meeting the people that are going to kind of raise up our industry moving forward. Those are the people I like to talk to. Other facets I kind of do here at Accurate Group, I actually like talking to the salespeople and getting on customer calls, because I kind of get to hear what's going on out there in the industry, their troubles, their things like that. Some of the customers I've actually met before from a past life. So I actually get to dabble in sales. When I was at Val Expo, got to talk to some of our people and that we work closely with, some of our customers. So that's kind of the fun thing. But of course, the no fun thing is like, okay, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to go through USPAP, and I'm going to find out why the areas they violated USPAP, what standards they violated, and let's turn them into the state. That's no fun. That's the no fun part of the day. I would rather not do that, but that's part of the job. So that's the unfun part.
I totally get that. What is you touched on an interesting thing again. Most people that might just be performing real estate appraisal assignments on a regular basis never experience. What does it mean for someone to be in? Like you said, I get to work alongside or work with our sales team. What does that mean?
Yeah, so we have a group of sales team that are in partnership and relationship with the various banks, credit unions, things like that. So to be able to support them if they're talking to a customer who may want to try out our Appraisal Works platform. They may get kind of down in the nitty gritty of maybe what type of appraisal review form do they need? What type of experience are they having in the appraisal space? So I kind of bring that appraisal knowledge alongside of them. So it could be just sitting there on a phone call with them, and maybe they want to meet the chief appraiser, to know how I feel about things, industry, things like that. We have a lot of conversations with our customers and such about appraisal bias, diversity in our industry. So I've tried to put on a really strong education about that, and always a student to learn about how we could be better in this space, and go to the customer calls and just talk about what we're looking at, how we're doing in this space, and what we're doing to be better stewards, right? So so that's kind of my idea and my concept of working alongside with sales, just to support them and help them out. But I get to meet people too, different ones.
Oh, fascinating. And I think that's an interesting perspective that maybe many of us have lost sight of, and that is that whole idea of business development. Somebodies need to be doing that. And at different organizations, they have different clients they call upon, and many of them ultimately may somehow or another come into a valuation product. But before it ever gets there, it's about solving the needs of that organization, be it a credit union or savings and loan or a national lender.
Right. And you have to, kind of understand their needs and such. And like I said, with the Appraisal Works platform, we've had a lot of them, they have their own review form. Is there a better way to do things? We talked about Power BI. That's one of the things that Appraisal Works, kind of has built in there. And in talking to one customer, they were talking about, well, we're doing a lot of spreadsheets and kind of checking up with our production 4 times a day. And I'm like, well, if you use this is, here's the even better if for you. If you use Power BI, layered in here with Appraisal Works, you're not gonna have to pull those spreadsheets. You're not gonna have to worry about that. You're gonna have instantaneous information in there. So, it's almost like watching the light bulb kind of turn on from them, and how they could even better their process. Again, I wouldn't be able to even talk intelligently about that had I not kind of walked through that process of learning that. So, that's why a lot of times after I get done with a customer, I will stop and think, it's like, man, if I hadn't volunteered for that, or I hadn't done that, I have no idea what we're talking about. Thank goodness I took the time to read this or talk to that person. So try to constantly keep myself going.
Hey, that's kudos to you. You're not from the South per se, but you're, the part of the rural portion of North Carolina is definitely a bit more Southern, if you will. And, in the South where I'm from, we have a little saying that says, when you're green, you're growing, but when you're right, you're right. And it's that sense of curiosity and that willingness to keep learning, and hey, I don't know necessarily what it is and how it works, but I'm open to how it might have some influence or have some improvements or have some impact. or it's just something nice to know. And definitely get that sense.
Yeah,
Given all that,
I hadn't heard that Southern phrase. I'll have to write that down. Kathy Smith used to throw a whole lot of Southern phrases at me at times that I'm like, I need a dictionary. So I just listened to Jeff Foxworthy, and maybe he could, kind of help me get through it. But I digress.
all those sentence sayings from Zig Ziglar, Southern and drawl as he did definitely not pull out the ripe you rot one. But love that nonetheless. I mean, given everything we've touched on and all that you've been involved in, I would love to hear, from your youthful perspective, looking out at the next, 3, 5, even 10 years, what has you intrigued or even optimistic about the industry and specifically that forthcoming future that we'll all soon be living into?
I really like what the Appraisal Institute, Freddie and Fannie, are doing with the Appraisal Diversity Initiative. I like how they are, partnering with the Urban League and, kind of going out into the world and trying to find those new fresh faces, different than you and I, which is, what we kind of need for good collaboration, right? You don't want to have the same people, the same voices. Otherwise it's not a collaboration. It's just a yes party, right? So, definitely, like the direction the industry is taking. There's a bunch of different ways to kind of, get into the industry now. I think it's going to take every single one of them and everybody kind of doing things differently to kind of attract that kind of new talent in there. So I'm very excited and love absolutely working with, Sergio Johnson and Rachel from Fannie as they kind of, bring forth the next generation of appraisers, which, Accurate Group is a sponsor for as well. So that's, just. And I've spent a lot of time at Valuation Expo talking to, like a dozen of them that happen to be there. And they're so excited to have this opportunity to come into this industry. It almost like reignites your passion for what you do. I can sit here and I can read the blogs and I can listen to some of the appraisers who are kind of going after appraisal monetization, like they're getting food taken out of their mouth, or I can look to these people who have a bright future ahead of them. And I'd rather listen to them, quite frankly.
I couldn't agree with you more so. I will, without naming any names, I was very candid in my sharing of a video not too long ago that was from Gary Vaynerchuk. It's not about whether you love Gary Vee or don't like Gary Vee, but I have to agree with his perspective. It could be many of others that have shared it. Ray Kurzweil's another one, but technology is going to continue to advance. We can either be part of it or not. And at least being informed is much better than being relegated. And so I really commend your approach in your career as well as your perspective. And I hope other people are inspired to maybe shift a little more in this direction, or maybe just they've kind of been beat up by the industry a little bit. Maybe it just reinvigorates them or gives them a little bit more of that spark that they naturally had, so that they can continue to have that type of influence and impact going forward.
Yeah, I believe that there's a place for you moving forward if you want it, right? I mean, if you want to opt out, fine, call it a career, that's fine. But I think there's a place for everybody if they want it in the technology piece and the data collecting, and sitting there at a desk, appraising that way. I think there's always going to be a need for somebody to actually go out to the property. Some of these are just too complex, too unique, to not have actually an appraiser go out. So you just have to find your sweet spot in this, and and progress and grow. That's if you think you're going to be doing appraisal the same way you did 20 years ago, I mean, just watch the journey you've taken, whether you liked it or not. You've grown whether you liked it or not. The software's changed. You're no longer doing it on a typewriter, with those like 3 sheets of paper all smacked together, with a thermal paper, whatever it was. Yeah. But you've actually grown, and if you look back to what you used to do, clipboard paper, graph paper, whatever, it's like you've actually been forced to grow. just embrace.
I love that. Thank goodness we can give thanks to Jeff Hogan for putting the waxiness on the fax paper. It's humorous reference.
Oh, love me some Jeff.
We got on his own, and gotta love Jeff.
Yeah.
His big investment's like, it's a fax machine. And he's like, Michael, you're not seriously going to ask me to explain what a fax machine is. I'm like, yeah. And he did a good job.
So he did. He's good people. I like Jeff.
I like a lot of these. Fantastic. Well, obviously it's been so much fun, fast paced, but in respect for those that still have to get some work done today, we're going to go ahead and kind of bring this to a close. And I want to thank you, Michele, for such an enlightening and informative kind of walk through a vast career to help all of us gain a little bit more understanding to how much something it's like just an appraisal report, like how much impact it has and how broad it is and how many different potential users there are directly or indirectly from that single product. So really appreciate this perspective.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this.
No, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. And again, we're bringing this episode of Perusing's The Power Values podcast to a close. Excited as we're nearing the end of season 2 and already in discussions for some fascinating guests, basically more Michele's, if you will, for season 3, and continuing to shed a light on how people have gone along in the profession, how they've gotten along in the profession, and how they're going along in the profession. So all that to say, keep sharing, keep liking this on whichever platform you're on, and keep sending back your comments, suggestions, feedback. Always great to continue to grow and expand. And I love what you said there, and that is progress and grow. So thank you so much, Michele. Much appreciated.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing life paths and achievements of our guests. Don't forget to like us on LinkedIn and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.